Okay, that rear lens looks pretty awful to me. I don't know how much that dirt's on the outside surface. We'll find out shortly. I'll remove that from the camera, from the shutter. Remove our shims. Remove the front group. The front group looks quite cloudy. Let's have a quick look at these lenses. I'll clean the front and rear surface, and that'll allow me to better assess the state of the internal surfaces without dismantling the lens. It may be that the grime is all on the external surfaces, in which case cleaning them will remove the problem. It's also possible that the grime is on the internal surfaces, as I suspect, in which case I'll have to have this unit apart. Now there are 3 pieces of glass in here. 2 of them are cemented together. Obviously I can't get to those cemented surfaces, but the other surfaces I can. It's like there's like a sheen on that lens, like something greasy. It's not cleaning particularly easily, but it is cleaning. Okay, I can look at that better now. And with transmitted light and reflected light I can judge what I'm seeing. And it looks quite good. Yeah, I don't think I need to do anything else to that, that's fine. And I'll turn my attention to this rear group. I'll do the same with this. Clean both external surfaces and then assess what I'm seeing. Being very gentle here with this because there's a lot of rubbish on there which I need to remove. Q-tips coming away very filthy. I don't want to be grinding that rubbish into the lens. Right, that looks a lot better. There's obviously, perhaps not you, but it's obvious to me there's a line running through here. It appears to be below the surface of the glass, which tells me it's probably on the rear face of this rearmost piece of glass. And I want to dismantle this, remove this retaining ring, and take that glass out and see if that mark will clean away. It's like a straight line across there. It doesn't look like a hair. No, possibly it is. It might be just a mark. It could be a scratch, but to get a scratch in a position like that, somebody would have had to have had the lens apart to scratch it, which would be tricky. Right, I'll find a shutter body that I can screw that in to act as a table. That will do. That's just another old shutter I've got there, or remains of a shutter. So this retaining ring may be locked in place with a touch of lacquer. So I'm just going to put a drop of acetone around that edge. Hopefully that will soften up any paint or lacquer that might be locking that in place. Alright, taking these modified circlip pliers, you just get that ring started. Push that round with the tip of a toothpick now, which is safer than using a metal tool because there's always the option to slip off and hit the lens. And a toothpick's not going to damage the lens, or certainly not damage it to any great extent. Right, that's off. Let's have that lens out. And looking at this, I can certainly see that mark on the inside surface there. So I will see if it cleans away. Yes. Yes, that's cleaning away. So it's like a not a scratch. It was like a line drawn on there, perhaps like a greasy mark, a very fine greasy mark or something drawn across there. That's good. I'm pleased to see that. Well, that's that little problem out of the way, really. So I'll clean that other surface, make sure that's right, pop that back in place, and the lens is good to go, I think. I'll consider opening up this front group too and doing the same to that. I need a stand to work on here for that lens. Normally I just use one of my rubber stoppers as a good stand to rest that on. I'll just clean this lens carefully. That looks good. And I will clean this lens just in case there's any haze on it. Seems good. Yeah. Making sure there's no dust inclusions there. Drop that lens back into the tube. Make sure that's seated correctly. That's good. Put its retaining ring back and then clean the outer surface. That should be fine. Let's just use this tool. Yes, that's good. Another cotton bud. I can still see the shadow of that line looking from here. Well, I couldn't see it when I was looking at it before. It's exceptionally faint. Don't worry about that. I think we'll got that as good as we're going to get it. Now, look at this lens again. That's fine. I'll compare the front and rear groups for clarity or haze. There's certainly something going on with this front group. So I will open that up. Now, the way this is assembled, there are two tiny grub screws here that lock this together. Back them off slightly. And the front should unscrew. Yeah, it does. Here's our front lens element. I'll tip that out. I can clean this surface in here. There's some spots on the mount here, like corrosion spots, which suggests that at some stage the lens may have been splashed. I'll just try and judge how clean that is. Speck of something that's in the centre on this face, I think. It's just a loose bit of dust. That's good. So this piece of glass, now holding this at an oblique angle to the light, it doesn't look particularly hazy. There is a suggestion of haze. I'll clean that and we'll pop this back together. As I'm cleaning this, I'm watching reflected light on the surface of that lens, and I can tell from that whether there's any smearing or anything untoward about the surface of the glass. That all looks very good. Put that back in place. That front surface does look pretty grimy around the edges. That would certainly tie in with my thought that it may have been splashed at some stage. Screw that back together, do that up tight. It only needs to be done up finger tight, don't need to use tools. Do up the two little grub screws. I'll clean that front surface once more. and have another look at it. Yeah, certainly a bit grimy around the edges. As I clean this, I'm rotating the cotton bud in my fingers to keep presenting a fresh surface to the lens, so that if you do pick up some microscopic piece of grit, you're not grinding it into the whole lens surface. Oh yeah, I'm happier about that. That looks much brighter and cleaner to me than it did to start off with, even though there wasn't a large noticeable problem to start off with. It certainly appears better now, so I'm pleased that I did that. So the shutter, that's the front trim ring that just sits in this well here. It's loose, it's not affected by the lens. It doesn't position the front lens. If it's not present, there'll be no ill effects. There's a shroud around the outside of this shutter. We'll get that off. I'll back the two screws up. Probably slide that off the shutter body. Here's the detent for the aperture settings. And we're down to the shutter itself. I'm just inspecting this now. The aperture setting it's very stiff, and those blades, you can probably see those, they distort quite badly when I go to move the aperture setting. That tells me those blades are stuck together. They'll be stuck together with oil, and so the shutter definitely needed to be serviced. Had it not been serviced, I'll just rotate this locking screw now. Had it not been serviced, inevitably the blades would have become damaged when the aperture setting was shifted, because there'd be so much force applied to one end of the blade and it not wanting to move that the rivets or something would end up getting torn out. Off with the speed control ring. And I'll stop right here before this camera decides it's going to stop. It doesn't like, got the flashing battery sign. So let's carry on with the shutter. The shutter release lever I can remove. I'll unhook the spring here from the main lever. If I unhook the spring from here, I can lift this lever out. This is the return lever for the shutter release button. There's the 500th of a second or high speed spring. A single screw holds this little catch in place, and this little catch holds the shutter in the cocked position once you've cocked it. This is the B lever here, and I'll remove that. The flash sink, we'll remove that. So just lever that up gently out of the case. And it's wedged in quite firmly. That's better. That's the front of the shutter stripped really, certainly as much as we need to for the moment. 3 screws hold the mechanism plate into the shutter case, and they're located at the back of the shutter case here. Alright, now we've split the shutter. Here's the case, the diaphragm visible there, and those blades look quite distorted. It means that they'll be fun to put back together, because when they're distorted, even after you've cleaned them, it's very hard to get them to lie flat enough to reassemble the diaphragm, so that'll be fun. Here's the mechanism plate and the blades. Nothing unusual to see there. The blades are not even particularly oily. They certainly could do with cleaning, and they could probably do with a polish. There's more oil visible on this blade and its mates. And the mechanism plate itself, this can be stripped down. So this little arm actuates the blade, moves the blade actuating ring. We'll just unhook its return spring so nothing flies across the room. Take that arm off. We've got 3 screws holding the retainer in place. Now that screw is loose. If these screws work loose, they can back out and foul the shutter blades and stop the shutter from being able to open and or close correctly. There's the retainer, and here's the blade actuating ring. That's the bit that swings backwards and forwards and swings the blades in and out. Now interestingly, there's a patch of corrosion visible here. Or it might just be dirt and dust. See if that cleans up. Doesn't look bad. And here we have the retard gear train. It does move. It's probably a bit dusty and dirty. That'll certainly need to be flushed. Typically I don't remove these from the mechanism plate when I'm servicing the shutter. That's because it's a bugger of a job getting your speeds adjusted correctly if you do remove it from the mechanism plate. If it gives you any great trouble after you've cleaned it in place, then probably your best course of action is to actually remove it and clean it in an ultrasonic cleaner, but generally it's not necessary. So all of this needs to be cleaned. All of this old gummy dried grease needs to go. It needs to be nice and clean. Any dust and lubricants or rubbish in the speed train needs to be washed out with solvent, and all around this here, all those surfaces need to be cleaned so that the blade actuating ring, and in fact the blades themselves, will run smoothly. So let's have a look at this. This is exceptionally gummy. I'm just rotating it far enough to get to the 2 screws that hold the lever onto the back of the moving plate here. And I've got this supported on the edge of the wooden block so that I don't bend stuff up. So there's our settings lever. Get that screw out. I need to go that way a bit. And let's have a go at this. Those blades are exceptionally gummy. Now, interestingly, the shutter blades didn't show a great problem with oil. They're obviously a little bit dirty, but nothing major. This, however, shows serious problems with oil contamination, which suggests to me that on the last occasion and possibly previous occasions, whoever serviced the shutter didn't go as far as stripping the diaphragm down and cleaning it. Now this is a nice neat rosette at the moment, but that's not unusual. Even when the blades are clean they'll do that. But these blades are quite sticky, and you can probably see the oil on the blades here. Now, highly polished thin pieces of metal like this, oil just sticks them together like glue. And what happens is, you can probably also see some distortion here. What happens is when you're adjusting the diaphragm, you're moving this plate. As you pull that one way or the other, you're pulling these blades outwards or inwards. Now if the blades are all stuck together and you're pulling like hell on one end of them, the blades get distorted, and that's exactly what's happened here. And it's probably most prominent around the rivets, but it's quite possible the blades don't sit correctly either. So I'll start here and I'll clean these components with Naphtha, and when they're all complete and cleaned, I'll put that back together. Now the grease or oil that you get on the blades in a shutter typically didn't come from the shutter originally. Typically it's migrated there, and usually the nearest thing to blame would be the focus helical. And what happens is that the volatile components of the lubricants vaporise, and then they settle or condense on some other handy surface. And nice broad flat cold metal surfaces like shutter blades and the like probably serve as just a wonderful place to settle and condense. It also happens to lenses. Oils that are vaporising elsewhere can settle on lenses. It's probably less of a problem, but it certainly can happen. I'm just cleaning this case carefully, make sure I get rid of all of that old rubbish. That looks good. It probably doesn't look much different to you, but I can tell by the shine of the metal that I've removed a haze of filth from it. Particularly on earlier shutters where there was no click stop for the aperture settings, some degree of resistance or drag on the aperture setting lever was desirable. Otherwise you may inadvertently knock the aperture setting quite easily while you're manipulating something else on the shutter, like the shutter speed settings or even the focus settings. But you don't want your resistance being at the blade's position. Normally the resistance where you have it, you want at the lever end of the business. And typically that's arranged by making sure that this plate is not dead flat. Basically, with a bit of bend to it, a bit of curve to it, a bit of distortion to it, you have some pressure points. It's pressing against the case, and that just gives you some controlled drag so that the aperture settings aren't moved accidentally. And leading you to waste film. And wasting film was, well, it's always been an annoyance. It's an annoyance these days, but it was more of an annoyance in the old days when film was very expensive.